The chairman of the guild slammed his fist on the polished table and declared my desert maps fantasy, his words cutting deeper than any criticism I'd ever received. In that instant, my future shattered, and I knew the only way forward was to walk away from the very people who had made me feel invisible. The guild that trained me for years dismissed my detailed charts of the dunes as fantasy. They called my ideas tech obsession with no real-world value and handed me a termination letter with a sneer. I packed my battered laptop, a handful of spare drone parts, and a stubborn resolve. I left the city, drove out to the barren outskirts where the wind sculpted dunes like frozen waves, and set up a makeshift camp under a cracked sky. Nights were cold, the only light a flickering lantern, and the silence pressed against my ears as I stared at a blank screen, wondering if I had wasted my life. Those first months were a blur of cold nights and endless trial. As an environmental cartographer, I refused to accept that the desert was immutable. My drones crashed, batteries died, and sand swallowed every hopeful line I drew. I spent weeks learning to program autonomous flight paths, then weeks more watching data streams flicker with the slightest hint of moisture hidden beneath the surface. When the first map revealed a hidden aquifer, the scientific community scoffed, but I persisted. I secured a modest grant, partnered with a conservation NGO, and began flying over the desert at dawn, stitching together high-resolution mosaics that showed how a single oasis could revive an entire valley. One pivotal moment came when a local governor, who had once laughed at my toy drones, invited me to present my findings at a municipal meeting. He watched the footage of a barren plain turning green, and his expression shifted from disbelief to awe. He offered a contract to map the entire regional watershed, a turning point that turned ridicule into responsibility. Negotiating the terms felt like walking a tightrope. I had to prove that my drones could survive the harsh noon heat and deliver data precise enough for government planners. The contract meant I could finally hire a small team, rent a proper base camp, and upgrade my fleet. Each new drone felt like a promise kept to the younger version of myself, who once stared at a cracked screen wondering if anyone would ever listen. Year after year, the once barren land responded. Shrubs sprouted, wildlife returned, and water tables rose. My dynamic environmental maps became the blueprint for restoration projects across 3 continents, earning awards, media attention, and most importantly, proof that my ridiculous dream had real, measurable impact. Today, my maps guide reforestation crews, help policymakers allocate water rights, and inspire a new generation of cartographers who once thought the desert was beyond saving. The invitation arrived, family reunion, Saturday at the old homestead, and my heart hammered. I drove back to the house where I had once been told I was an embarrassment. The porch light flickered as I stepped onto the cracked steps, and the familiar scent of pine and dusk greeted me. My mother opened the door, eyes widened, and for a heartbeat she seemed to search for the boy she had dismissed. I handed her a tablet, pressed play, and the screen filled with sweeping aerial footage of the desert transformed. Emerald corridors of reclaimed land, thriving wetlands where sand once ruled, and villages thriving on water we had mapped into existence. The room fell silent, then erupted in stunned applause. My father, who had called my work a childish fantasy, stared at the footage, his hands trembling, and whispered, "I never imagined." He stepped forward, placed a hand on my shoulder, and said, "You've shown us that the ground we thought was barren can indeed bloom. I'm proud of you, son." My sister, who had mocked my toy drones, covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. My mother reached out, her fingers brushing the tablet as if to touch the landscape herself, and whispered, I didn't realize," her voice cracking. "We were blind." She stepped closer, eyes glistening, and said, "All those years I judged you by the stories I heard, not by the truth you were mapping. I'm sorry." The silence that followed felt like a promise fulfilled. I smiled, not in triumph, but in gratitude. The journey taught me that belief in oneself is the most resilient map of all, and that karma, when patient, writes its own ledger. As the sun set over the reclaimed oasis visible through the kitchen window, I realized the true map I'd drawn was not of land, but of forgiveness, resilience, and the quiet power of staying true to a vision others called foolish.